I mean, the intelligent people are going to exit on an arc of encrypted energy. And the ignorant ones are not going to exit, and they're going to have the life force sucked out of them. If you're selling $50 billion worth of commodities or exports every year, and you're using the dollar as your treasury reserve asset, you're propping up $100 trillion currency that's inflating at 10, 15, 20% a year. So that's just shipping. That's in essence shipping all of your treasury to the dollar over the course of a decade. If you switch that and you started buying CNY, you'd be propping up the Chinese currency. Instead of propping up $100 trillion currency, you'd be propping up a $20 or $30 trillion currency, and that's to the benefit of the Chinese. If you switch to gold, you would be propping up a $12 trillion currency. And if you switch to Bitcoin, you would be propping up a less than $1 trillion currency. So if people were rational, I don't think they are, by the way. Luckily for us, 98% of them aren't, because you couldn't be in the top 2% if everybody else was as smarter than you, could you? Right? So I guess they're not really totally rational, but if you were rational, the obvious thing to do if you're an export country is you start exporting in Bitcoin, and then you sweep your cash flows into Bitcoin, and then you probably make like $500 billion or $1 trillion. Remember when I tweeted to Elon, I said, I didn't say buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. I said buy 10 billion worth of Bitcoin, and then issue $10 billion of converts and buy 10 billion more, and you make 100 billion, and then all the S&P follows you and you make $1 trillion. Well, he didn't quite do that, right? I mean, he did a little bit. I'm okay with the $1.5 billion, but the point is, why doesn't someone do a $25 billion buy at Google? And the answer is because of politics and institutional inertia. And, some people don't want the trillion. Okay, so why doesn't a government do it? Politics, institutional inertia. When will they do it? Well, that this is the butterfly effect, right, guys? It's like, how do you predict when someone gets whacked on the side of the head and knocked out of their comfort zone and decides to go and bend over and pick up the $1 trillion? I don't know, right? Like, my real point is, any of 1,000 people could do it, and maybe none of them will do it. But if you're betting that not a single one of them wants the $1 trillion, I mean, it seems to me like over a decade, somebody wants the $1 trillion. I just don't know who will have the courage and the clarity of conviction to do it. Why hasn't Apple bought $20 billion of Bitcoin and made $100 billion overnight yet? The answer is they're afraid, and they have political constraints. They're afraid of their shareholders. The accounting makes it ugly. So, you wonder, why don't they just bend over and make $1 trillion? If you look at the swap curve, you look at the interest rate curves, it's flat. I mean, 2-year money is the same cost as 30-year money. I mean, they're all surging up today, but like 245 basis points for 2 years versus 30 years. What it's telling you is the market thinks that we're hitting a recession. They're never going to raise interest rates. They're going to raise them 2-3 times and stop. And interest rates are never going to get above 150 basis points ever. That's what they're thinking. Or what you have is a non-economic, non-market actor just holding down the long end of the yield curve with infinite money by printing money. In either case, the conclusion is currencies continue to weaken. Second tier currencies collapse. Third tier currencies all collapse. The first tier currencies weaken 15-20%. And I think if we come back to the big theory of money here, right, under the gold standard, if the dollar was backed by gold, it was stable, to Mark's point. But if we thought about it deeply, gold is not perfect money. Gold has actually got a half-life of 35 years. The reason the dollar was stable was the economy was growing on average 2% a year, and the supply of money on average was growing at 2% a year. And if both of those things peg, it's almost impossible to grow anything more than 2 or 3% a year over the course of a long period of time. So what you had was stable money in the form of gold. We never had good money, right? We never had hard money. If we had perfect money, the value of the dollar wouldn't have stayed constant. The value of the dollar would have increased by 2 to 3% a year. And over the course of 30 years, you would have doubled your wealth by just saving money or more. And everything just keeps getting cheaper. So under perfect money, you have deflation. Under gold money, you have constant prices. Under fiat money, you have rampant inflation. Even if you look at official government documents, they keep talking about purchasing power, and they calculate it based on CPI, and they tell you that your money lost 95% of its value. That is not true, right? If you look at the last 100 years, take the US dollar. I'm sitting in a house that cost $100,000 in 1930. I have the bill of sale on the wall, and Zillow thinks it's worth $28 million right now. The money lost 99.5% of its value over 80 to 90 years. And if you back calculate the real loss of purchasing power against a market basket of scarce assets of the US dollar, you conclude that we're really inflating the currency 7 to 8% a year every year for 100 years. It happens to correlate closely with the S&P index, which has been going up 10% a year for 100 years. You get the money supply plus 2 or 3% in the economy. Once you do that, what you realize is the very best currency loses 99.5% or 99.8% of its value over 100 years. Every other currency loses 100% of its value over 100 years.
Right.
Now, the real question is, what do you adopt as your treasury reserve asset? And if it's currency and currency derivatives in dollars, you have made the institutional decision to surrender 99.5% of your assets to the government over the course of 80, 90 years. So I guess the metaphor would be, Anthony, what if I told you I was going to make you 20 years older so that I could be 20 years younger? And what if I told you I was going to take all of your children and accelerate their age to age 75 so that I, at age 65, could be rolled back to 30 because I'm so brilliant that I know your future and I should run the country for you for another 30 years? What you really have is a parasitic situation where you're siphoning off the life force and the energy from the working class to the property class, from the free market to the centrally controlled government to the government. And the only choice you had in the last 10,000 years was maybe gold, but gold was never perfected money. It was always, it's double imperfect, right? It's losing 2% of its value a year, and also is getting debased by whoever controls the mint, and it's also getting seized. So gold is like triple imperfect money. We didn't have anything that looked like theoretically perfect money until January 3rd, 2009. And then it took about 10 years of beating on it to determine that it wasn't going to crumple under some kind of engineering mistake. And so now here you are in the year 2022, and reasonable, intelligent people have concluded that this is engineered perfect money. That's like 2, 3, 4% of the marketplace. 97% of the people don't even know what money means. And if you don't know what money is, then you couldn't actually go on a search for engineered perfect money. And if you look at the Russians and the Chinese, they've all been hit with a 2x4 in the head, and they've been invited to consider whether or not a treasury reserve strategy of holding fiat currency and credit derivatives is in fact perfect money. And now they know it isn't perfect, and they either have to look back to the 19th century and gold, which was the best idea for 10,000 years, but a crappy idea that failed 5,000 times. Or you roll forward to the 21st century and you ask, is there a better idea? And Bitcoin is the better idea, wrapped in all the crypto technology that comes with. So what's going to happen, right? Intelligent people are going to watch YouTube, and they're going to realize that the currency has a half-life, right? The US dollar had a half-life of 10 years, and now it has a half-life of 5 years. And every other currency has a half-life of 3 years. Gold has a half-life of 30 years. Bitcoin has a half-life of forever, infinite, forever. Once people figure that out, you have a mass exodus, an evacuation, not from Europe to the New World, but from real space to cyberspace. The money goes from analog to digital, and it goes from unencrypted to encrypted. I mean, the intelligent people are going to exit, right, on an arc of encrypted energy. And the ignorant ones are not going to exit, and they're going to have the life force sucked out of them. So to Mark's point, right, what's the ratio between half-life of infinity divided by 35 years? How much better is Bitcoin infinity versus 35 years of gold?